All right, so we're going to be solving right triangles. So here is what you want. So right triangle means basically that it's going to have one angle that's 90 degrees. The other two angles are going to add up to 90 degrees because you should have a total of 180, okay? So if you're asked to solve, what you want is you want to have all three sides and you want to have all three angles, okay? Some of that information is going to be given to you. But when you're done and the triangle is completely solved, you have all 6 pieces of information, right? All 6 parts. That's your ultimate goal if you're asked to solve it, okay? So in order to do that, you're going to need some information, okay? So what you're going to need to know is obviously first that it's a right triangle. So you're definitely going to know that there's a 90 degree in there somewhere, okay? And beyond that, you're either going to need 2 side lengths or you're going to need 1 side length and 1 more angle. Right? And now if you can take your brain back to geometry for a second, you'll remember there are some things that you learned in geometry, like basically what your tools were when you were in geometry. So here's what you can use. First, you learn this special formula called the Pythagorean Theorem. Pythagorean theorem is used on a right triangle, which these are going to be right triangles. If you know 2 of the sides, you plug the 2 sides in and you solve for the 3rd side. Okay, whether they be the legs or whether they be the hypotenuse, make sure you put the missing part in the right spot. Okay. Second, you learned trigonometry. And so trigonometry will help you solve for sides or for angles. Sides is when you use regular trig, and we'll talk about the buttons on the calculator in just a second. And angles is when you use something called inverse trig. Okay? Inverse trig is not the same as what we did yesterday, where we had the reciprocal, okay? Not the same. The inverse trig is going to have this little -1 up in the air, in like a little exponent. We'll see it. If you look on your calculator, right above the sine button is going to be an inverse sine, and right above the cosine is an inverse cosine. So that on these calculators, you're going to hit the blue button first, then that button, okay? So we're going to do an example of each. So let's start with example number 1. So we've got a right triangle. That little box means you've got 90 degrees, okay? And then you're going to be given 2 sides. So the 2 sides I'm giving you is this one right here, we'll call it 5 inches. And this one right here, we'll call it 5.7 inches. And let's just label these vertices. We'll call it R, S, T. So on a right triangle, if you're given two sides to get the third side, you just want to use the Pythagorean Theorem to get that third side first. So I'm going to put an x over there. Is that x a leg or a hypotenuse? It's a leg. So the x needs to either go in for A or B. Technically, it doesn't matter. Okay, so I'm going to say to get that third side, first I'm going to use the Pythagorean Theorem, and I'm going to plug that in for the first variable. So I'm going to have x squared. The 5 is the second leg, and that's going to be equal to the hypotenuse squared, so 5.7 squared. From here, most of this can be done on your calculator, right? So x squared plus 25, and then you want to take 5.7 and square it. You can use the square button, or you can just multiply 5.7 times 5.7, and you should get 32.49. And then you subtract 25 from both sides. And so x squared is going to be equal to 7.49. Obviously not a perfect square, right? But you can just do that on your calculator, and you'll get approximately 2.74 inches. Okay? So you already had two sides. That gives you the third side, and so now you have all three sides. Check. Okay. Now the problem is you need some angles, right? We know this 90 degree right here, but this angle R and this angle T we need to get. So you kind of just pick one or the other. So let's pick angle R. Okay? In order to get angle R, we need to use trigonometry. Oh, you can't see it up there. We're going to use trigonometry. And so if we're looking for an angle, we need to use inverse trig, not regular trig. And so one thing that's helpful, and I teach my geometry students to do, is to circle the angle that you're working from, because that's kind of like the address. And then you're going to use two of the sides, right? So over here, we've got this side that we just figured out, but we already know the 5 and the 5.7. So from R, the 5 is opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse? Adjacent. So I'm going to write a little ADJ. And over here, the one that's labeled 5.7, opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse? Hypotenuse. And so you have to think, okay, which of the three trig functions uses adjacent and hypotenuse? The cosine. So we're going to say that the cosine of angle R is going to be equal to the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So in this case, there's a 5 on the adjacent, and there's a 5.7 on the hypotenuse. Okay? So in order to get the degree angle, we actually have to use the inverse. So we're going to say inverse cosine of, this is going to end up being a decimal, this 5 divided by 5.7. And here's how you type it in the calculator. On this calculator, you're going to need to hit second and then cosine. Notice that it's going to say cosine inverse, not just cosine. And then you're just going to type this fraction just like you see it, 5 divided by 5.7. Close those parentheses up, and then hit equals. And it says 28.6. So angles, you usually round up to the nearest whole number. Right now there's a 28 in front of that decimal, but after the decimal is a 6. So do you stay 28 or round up? Round up. You want to round up. So this is going to be 29 degrees. So angle R is 29 degrees. We're almost done, right? We have all three sides. Now we just need all three angles. We have 90, we have 29, so can we get angle T? Yes. Do we need to use another trig function? No. We can just calculate it. You just say angle T is going to be 180 minus the 90 that they gave us, minus the 29 that we just found. That leaves us with 61. Okay? Now we have all three angles. Check. Three sides, three angles. Okay? Some of the information they gave us, some we still had to figure out. All right? Any questions on example number 1 there? All right, that's how you do it when you're given 2 sides, right? I'm going to move that up. The next one, example number 2, on this one, we're going to be given 1 side and 1 angle. Oop, let me move that whole thing up, sorry. Does anybody still need to see example 1? All right, so let's draw this triangle. Obviously, it has to be a right triangle. Well, this is A, B, C. And this time, we're given 1 side and 1 angle. So the side that we're given is going to be this side over here, square root of 6 centimeters. And the angle that we're given is angle B right here. So we're going to, it's, does that say 5? Yeah, 5 degrees. Is that right? So, sorry, it's going to be 15. I'm like, is that a line? Yeah, that's a line. Okay. So it's 15. All right, so let's do that one first, right? If we know the little box means it's 90, right? This one's 15. So to get angle A, we're going to start with 180, subtract the 90 that we know, subtract the 15 that they gave us. That means there's how much left? 75. Okay? So we can fill that in. Now we've got all 3 angles. All right? Now we just need to get the 2 missing sides. So we need side AC over here, and we need side BC. So side BC, I'm going to call X, and side AC, I'm going to call Y. All right? Now that we know both of these acute angles, we can start from either one. I'm going to choose to start from angle A up here. Okay? So from angle A, I'm going to solve for X first. So from angle A, is that opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse? Opposite. And obviously this is the hypotenuse. So which trig function uses opposite and hypotenuse? Sine. So I'm going to say the sine, and this time we know the angle measure is 75 degrees, so we just write it, is equal to the opposite, we don't know it yet, so we fill in our X, over the hypotenuse, which is the square root of 6. And it looks really hard because it has a square root in it, but your calculator will do the square root for you, okay? So don't worry about it. You just need to know how to type it in the calculator, all right? So we want to solve for this X. This X right now is being divided by the square root of 6. So the inverse operation is to multiply by the square root of 6. So they cancel over here, and we're left with X is equal to the square root of 6 times the sine of 75. So let's type that into the calculator. And that's going to give us a side measure. So those we're going to round to the nearest, what, 100th? Is that what it, I can't remember what it says on your worksheet. So we're going to go the square root of 6. So you have to hit the second and then the square root button. It should come up on your screen as square root of 6 times the sine of 75. When you're typing multiple things, make sure to close parentheses so that the calculator's doing it. Sometimes if you don't close parentheses, it gets you a weird answer. And you should